President Trump touting his academic success, claiming he was first in his class at Wharton. He wasn't, because in 1968, the year Trump graduated from Wharton, his school paper, the Daily Pennsylvania, published a list of the 56 students who were on the Wharton Dean's List of that year. Trump's name is not among them.
President Trump's background has always been heavily focused on one specific aspect of his life, his academic performance. The assertion that he graduated at the top of his class at Wharton College of the University of Pennsylvania has been repeated so many times that it has been accepted as fact. However, if one begins to look at the rhetoric versus the records, it quickly becomes obvious that this claim doesn't hold up. The fact that he was never listed in the publications of the school in 1968 doesn't necessarily mean he was ranked lower, but it does mean he was never ranked at the top of his class. This is the point at which the world of Jimmy Kimmel's show found its opening. The ongoing battle of words between Jimmy Kimmel and President Trump isn't just funny, it's also strategic. When President Trump calls Jimmy Kimmel untalented or low-rated, he's following a classic script of trying to discredit the opponent. When Jimmy Kimmel fires back with his own barbs, he's doing more than just shooting back. He's reframing the situation to bring attention to the situation rather than just trying to get a laugh. The reason this situation stands out is the tone. The tone of a late-night monologue is typically one of rhythm and timing. However, in this situation, the rhythm and timing are interrupted by Jimmy Kimmel's sudden shift in subject. Instead of continuing to trade barbs with the President of the United States, he's now talking about the subject of intelligence and his high test scores. This phrase, popularized by Trump himself, becomes the point of entry. It's not just a boast, but also a challenge contained in the rhetoric. The challenge, or boast, contains the criteria for evaluation in the form of references to IQ, grades, and academic achievement. Kimmel's approach was to embrace the criteria, but also to literally apply it. The on-air IQ challenge was not, in fact, intended to be an actual test, but one meant to reveal the discrepancy between claim and verification. This is where the mention of Michael Cohen becomes relevant. The congressional testimony, where Cohen was involved, added another level to the story, one not related to performance, but to concealment. The implication, based on the testimony, was that Trump's academic records had been hidden or concealed. The implication was one where the lack of proof was not just the absence of proof, but also one where the lack of proof was, in fact, proof. Kimmel's use of this, however, was not as the punchline, but as the pivot. The pivot was the implication that if the records existed, they had been hidden. And if they had been hidden, what does this reveal about the confidence in the claims? The letter reveal segment, or the framing around it, becomes the climax of this pivot, turning the commentary into something akin to disclosure. The language contained in the letter, such as below average or 38th percentile, directly contradicts the claims of academic achievement. The more important implication, however, was the mention of the letter, the admission, and the connection to Fred Trump. At that point, the response of the audience is also factored in. The transition from laughter to silence to shock is a transition in the way the content is being processed. This is not longer the satire operating in its own space. It is the satire meeting something that feels like verification, and that is the space that Kimmel is working in. The aftermath only serves to further emphasize this point. In Trump's ecosystem, time is of the essence, particularly on platforms like Twitter, X. Silence, therefore, becomes conspicuous. While it may be intentional or not, it gives room for the narrative to settle without immediately counter-narrating, which is not often Trump's style. What this exchange ultimately shows, however, is not simply a disagreement between a president and a late-night host. What it shows is a masterclass on how modern political identity is built and broken down. Trump's image has been built on being able to assert his claims, on being able to make a claim repeatedly and have it become believable by virtue of repetition alone. Kimmel's response, by extension, is a clever subversion of this. Rather than directly counter-asserting, he introduces friction. And this, ultimately, is why this exchange feels significant. It's not simply whether Trump was or was not a top student. It's what happens when a carefully constructed image is put into direct contact with verifiable, or at least arguable, fact. And when this happens, comedy is no longer simply a form of entertainment. It becomes a form of inquiry, one that, under the right circumstances, has the ability to burst even the most durable of political bubbles.